In August 2013, in Nebraska, a series of horrifying murders occurred within less than 10 days, spreading fear throughout the city. Victims were successively killed and their bodies dumped in public places, leaving everyone in a state of panic and anxiety, wondering how many more times the killer would strike. The police immediately launched an investigation, mobilizing all available resources, but every lead seemed to hit a dead end. The perpetrator left no clear traces until a small fingerprint emerged, becoming a crucial turning point in the case. However, when the killer's identity was finally revealed, everyone was horrified by his terrifying past. He was called a devil in human form, and some even claimed he was the most dangerous person on the planet. What really happened that summer? Let's rewind to 2013 and uncover the truth behind this shocking series of murders. In the early hours of August 11, 2013, a police officer on patrol near Spring Lake Park accidentally noticed a white pickup truck parked on the side of the road. Peering through the window, he was stunned by the scene inside: two men lying motionless in their seats, blood splattered across the vehicle. The police immediately cordoned off the scene. The truck was a white Ford F-150, and inside were the bodies of two men who had been shot in the head at close range. Preliminary investigations suggested the weapon used was likely a 12-gauge shotgun. The victims' pockets had been rummaged through, their money stolen, indicating a robbery-turned-murder. At the scene, the police found a single fingerprint on the truck's door handle. When cross-referenced with their database, the results surprised the investigative team. The fingerprint belonged to a woman named Bordeaux. Bordeaux was summoned for questioning, but she claimed she had previously met one of the victims to get acquainted, and her fingerprint on the truck was completely normal. With no other evidence linking her to the crime, the police had no choice but to suspend the investigation. While authorities were still struggling to find leads, just 8 days later, another horrific murder occurred. On the early morning of August 19, 2013, a convenience store employee, having just finished the night shift, was walking wearily home. As he passed by a deserted parking lot, he suddenly stopped. Ahead of him was a pile of clothes stained with blood. Sensing something was wrong, he approached and was immediately horrified to realize it wasn't just clothes, but a lifeless body. A man wearing a hoodie with the hood pulled over his head, black pants, and sneakers lay face down on the grass. Right in the middle of his head was a large bullet hole, blood pooling beneath him under the morning sunlight. Blood had soaked through the victim's clothes, making it clear that this was a brutal shooting. The police quickly secured the crime scene and began their investigation. Near the victim's head, they found a 12-gauge shell casing, and inside the skull, a smaller bullet fragment remained. Based on the severity of the injury and the amount of blood loss, forensic experts concluded that the perpetrator had fired at close range. This raised suspicions that the killer might have been someone the victim knew. When all the evidence was analyzed back at the lab, a chilling realization struck the investigators. This case bore eerie similarities to the murder just 8 days prior. Both crimes took place in Omaha. Both involved the same 12-gauge firearm. And most disturbingly, both victims were shot in the head at close range. The similarities were too striking to ignore. The police now had strong reasons to believe that the same person was behind both murders. In less than 10 days, 3 lives had been taken, plunging Omaha into fear and chaos. Public outrage grew, and the pressure on law enforcement intensified. If they didn't catch the killer soon, he would likely strike again. Since the first case had yielded little progress, the police shifted their focus entirely to the second murder, hoping it would lead them to the perpetrator before another life was lost. Through DNA analysis, the victim was identified as Curtis, a young man with a criminal record. He had previously served time in prison and was closely associated with a gang in Camden. His connections were complex and dangerous, leading investigators to suspect that he might have crossed the wrong person, resulting in his death. However, there was no concrete evidence to confirm this theory. The police began questioning local residents near the crime scene, asking if they had noticed anything unusual that night. Some witnesses reported hearing faint gunshots around 10:30 8:30 p.m. on August 18th, but since the sounds were unclear, they hadn't called the authorities. A breakthrough came from one of Curtis's friends, who revealed that on the evening of August 18th, Curtis had attended a barbecue from around 7 to 8 p.m. Later that night, the friend saw Curtis speaking with a man named Nikko on the opposite side of the street. After a short conversation, the two left together. With this information, Nikko became the prime suspect. Surprisingly, investigating him was easier than expected because he was already a well-known figure in the area. For over 20 years, he had spent most of his life behind bars, and detailed records of his criminal history were readily available. Nikko Jenkins was born on September 16, 1986, in Colorado, into a family steeped in crime and violence. Before officially marrying, his parents had already had 6 children together, and Nikko was their only son. His father, David, was a notorious criminal with violent tendencies, frequently in and out of prison for serious offenses. His method of parenting was brutal. He ruled with an iron fist, either beating or berating his children into submission. His mother, Lori, was no better. She had multiple criminal convictions and showed little interest in raising her children. Growing up in such an environment, it was inevitable that the Jenkins children would turn to crime. From a young age, they were exposed to drugs, firearms, gang violence, and theft as a normal part of daily life. But even among them, Nikko stood out as the most troubled. At just 7 years old, he brought a loaded gun to school and threatened his classmates. This reckless act led to his immediate expulsion. During this time, his father abandoned the family and disappeared without a trace. With no one to take care of him, Nikko was placed into the foster care system. At the age of 8, as many had predicted, psychiatrists diagnosed him with a severe mental disorder. However, due to his young age, his condition was not given proper attention. By the time he turned 11, Nikko was expelled from his foster home for repeatedly attacking his peers and teachers. From that point on, he completely let himself go, spiraling further into delinquency. Between the ages of 12 and 15, he was sent to the Douglas Juvenile Detention Center for multiple offenses, including knife assaults, battery, and theft. In 2002, at the age of 16, Nikko was released from juvenile detention. However, instead of turning over a new leaf, he plunged deeper into crime. He committed theft, robbery, and even engaged in violent street altercations. Despite his growing list of offenses, he managed to avoid getting caught. That luck ran out on November 11, 2003, when the 17-year-old Nikko committed an armed carjacking. This time, he was caught in the act and sent to a juvenile correctional facility. In court, Nikko was sentenced to 18 years in prison for robbery, illegal use of a firearm, and second-degree assault. However, even behind bars, he remained a menace. In 2006, he took part in a prison riot that left several correctional officers injured. Later, during a temporary release to attend his grandmother's funeral, he attempted to escape and assaulted a prison guard. These actions resulted in an extended sentence of 21 years. Psychologists diagnosed Nikko with severe psychopathy and paranoid delusions, recommending that he be transferred to Lincoln State Psychiatric Hospital for treatment. However, this proposal was ultimately denied. Due to his high-risk nature, prison authorities placed Nikko in solitary confinement, a small, isolated cell where he was only allowed 1 hour a day for exercise and hygiene. Years of imprisonment seemed to bring about a change in him. Over time, Nikko began exhibiting signs of good, creating the illusion that he was ready to reintegrate into society. On February 6, 2010, he shocked many when he married a 19-year-old woman named Kalanda while still in prison. The woman frequently visited Nikko in prison and was one of his most devoted fans, even considering him an idol. On July 30, 2013, after serving 10.5 years, Nikko was granted early release due to good behavior. However, less than a month after his release, he committed 2 consecutive murders. The second victim, Curtis, was actually a friend Nikko had met in prison. After both were released, they happened to run into each other and were overjoyed by their reunion. Police even found affectionate photos of the two in Curtis's friend's home. Additionally, Bordeaux, the person whose fingerprints were found at the scene of the first murder, was none other than Nikko's cousin. These connections further solidified suspicions against him. Just as the police were preparing to bring Nikko in for questioning, a third murder unexpectedly occurred, completely derailing their plans. On August 21st, just 3 days after the previous crime, at around 2:15 a.m., law enforcement received an emergency call.
68 in Fort Street, 168 in Fort, St. Jeff. Car saw an SUV and a sedan at the intersection and heard 4 shots.
On patrol 13. I'm going to need a supervisor. I'm going to need a squad to this location. I have a female face down on the street.
The deputy sheriff immediately led a team to the scene, but by the time they arrived, they found only the body of a woman riddled with bullet wounds lying on the road. The killer had long since fled. 3 murders in 10 days. For victims, the entire city of Omaha was gripped with fear. The pressure on the Douglas County Police Force was immense. To reassure the public, the police chief held an emergency press conference, vowing to do everything possible to solve the case swiftly, apprehend the perpetrator, and deliver justice to the victims. The 4th victim, Kruger, had been shot multiple times in the face, neck, and shoulders. The murder weapon was, once again, a 12-gauge shotgun. With this, police confirmed that all 3 murders were connected and were likely committed by the same person or group. Surveillance footage from Kruger's workplace showed that she had finished her shift at 1:47 a.m. and driven home in a gold-colored SUV. However, on the way, she had clearly been ambushed. By 6:30 p.m. That same day, investigators traced her vehicle through multiple surveillance cameras and found it abandoned in an alleyway approximately 19 kilometers from the crime scene. Inside the car, they discovered significant bloodstains and bullet casings, as well as fingerprints on the door handle. Upon analysis, the prints belonged to 2 individuals. One was Kruger and the other, unsurprisingly, was Nikko. Police also suspected that his cousin, Bordeaux, played a role in the crimes, likely as an accomplice. In reality, the Nikko family had committed a staggering 633 crimes in Omaha, Nebraska, since 1979. While authorities were well aware of their extensive criminal history, no one had anticipated that they would be bold enough to carry out a series of brutal murders. Instead of rushing to make an arrest, law enforcement maintained 24/7 surveillance around Nikko's residence. During their investigation, they uncovered surveillance footage from a local gun store showing a woman purchasing 12-gauge shotgun ammunition, matching the type used in the crimes. After comparing images, they identified the woman as Lori, Nikko's mother. At this point, the evidence overwhelmingly pointed to Nikko as the killer, with his mother and cousin acting as accomplices. On August 30th, just as police were preparing to arrest him, Nikko's wife unexpectedly filed a report claiming that he had been abusing her. The police arrested Nikko, and during a search of his home, they found a gym bag under his bed containing a short-barreled shotgun and an assault rifle. Forensic experts recovered multiple fingerprints from the rifle, including those of Nikko and Curtis. This evidence would become a crucial factor in securing a conviction. Shortly after Nikko's arrest, his family members were also taken into custody. Facing murder charges, Nikko adamantly denied any involvement. However, as more evidence emerged, he changed his story, claiming he suffered from schizophrenia and had no recollection of his actions. At times, he even cooperated with investigators, analyzing the case as though he were an outsider. He insisted he had no motive to kill Curtis, whom he considered a close brother from prison. As for Kruger's death, he claimed it had nothing to do with him, stating he had never harmed a woman in his life. With an air of confidence, Nikko told officers, "You can ask any woman in North Omaha if I've ever laid a hand on them. Never." Had the police not already gathered solid evidence, they might have been deceived by his act. On September 3rd, after intense psychological pressure and hours of interrogation, Nikko gradually confessed to his crimes during an 8-hour conversation. He claimed that all the murders were sacrifices to the ancient Egyptian god of chaos, Apophis, and that he had been following divine instructions. He described his mental state upon leaving prison as completely shattered, recalling times when he went 36 hours without sleep. He said voices in his head told him that only through killing could he find salvation, and that the great Apophis would protect him. Throughout his confession, Nikko repeatedly emphasized his supposed mental illness. In November 2013, he wrote a letter to the Omaha World-Herald, asking the newspaper to advocate for him and for the victims' families. He stated that he was willing to plead guilty, but only under the condition that he receive psychiatric treatment. A few months later, Nikko turned his blame toward the Nebraska government, accusing them of knowingly releasing him despite his severe mental illness and claiming that dark forces had been controlling him. He argued that the state was responsible for the 4 murders and should compensate him for his psychological suffering. He even demanded $24.5 million in damages. The police were speechless at Nikko's attempt to shift the blame, but regardless of his excuses, he had already confessed. The case now moved to the trial phase, which was expected to be lengthy. On February 12, 2014, the trial officially began at the Douglas County Courthouse. During the hearings, prosecutors summoned key witnesses, including Nikko's mother, Lori, his sister, Erica, his cousin, Bordeaux, and his uncle, Warren. One by one, they testified about what they knew, allowing the prosecution to piece together the full timeline of the 3 murders. After his release from prison, Nikko had been living with his cousin Brian. His sisters frequently visited him, and on the night of the first murder, Nikko, Erica, and Bordeaux drove to a nightclub near 30th Street. Since Nikko had just gotten out of prison and had no money, they decided to commit a robbery. Erica and Bordeaux randomly approached 3 strangers and offered them a one-night stand. Tempted by the proposal, the men quickly agreed. They followed the 2 women to a nearby apartment and began negotiating. One of them, lacking enough cash, left to withdraw money. When he returned, he found that his 2 friends had already left with Erica and Bordeaux. Those 2 men became the first victims. They were lured to Spring Lake Park, and just as they were about to engage with the women, a man dressed in black suddenly stepped out of another car. It was Nikko. Holding a gun, he shouted at Jorge and Juan, demanding they hand over their money. Before they could react, Nikko pulled the trigger, and both men collapsed in pools of blood. He calmly searched their belongings, taking a bag of marijuana and some cash before fleeing the scene. Back home, Nikko handed a wallet to his mother and instructed her to dispose of it.
Bordeaux, terrifié,
asked why he had to kill them. Nikko nonchalantly replied that he didn't want to leave any witnesses. Unlike Bordeaux, Erica seemed excited. She thought the way her brother shot the victims in the head was cool and wanted to experience it herself. The second victim, Curtis, was a member of a gang that had a feud with Erica. When she learned that Curtis knew Nikko, she asked her brother for help in taking revenge. Nikko agreed without hesitation, disregarding any notion of loyalty. He invited Curtis to join their robbery crew alongside Erica. The 3 met at Curtis's house to prepare, each arming themselves and discussing their plan. As they were about to leave, Lolo, another sister, happened to be there and insisted on joining. Thus, the 4 of them set out together. At around 10:30 p.m., while walking down a deserted street, Erica suddenly fired a shot into Curtis's head. Nikko immediately followed up with another shot. By 1 a.m., the 3 fled the scene and took refuge at their cousin Brian's house. Later, during a heated family argument, Erica, in a fit of rage, shouted, "I'll kill you just like I killed that guy." This statement later became one of the most damning pieces of evidence against her. 3 days later, Nikko planned an even bigger crime. He gathered Erica, Bordeaux, and his uncle Warren to discuss a new robbery. They targeted Kruger because she drove a flashy SUV. Nikko ruthlessly shot her multiple times in the head and shoulders before driving away in her vehicle. Throughout the crime spree, Warren played a significant role in assisting them. When the full truth came to light, the sheer brutality of their actions shocked the public. At the trial, despite overwhelming evidence against him, Nikko feigned insanity, claiming he was controlled by a supernatural force. However, it was clear to everyone that he was merely putting on an act to escape punishment. Initially, the court intended to sentence him to death, but due to a supposed mental condition, the sentencing was delayed. However, his accomplices were not as fortunate. Nikko's mother, Lori, was sentenced to 10 years in prison for being an accomplice. She was accused of purchasing weapons for her son and helping him dispose of the clothes he wore during the crimes. Despite clear evidence, she continued to deny her guilt in court. His sister, Erica, was sentenced to life in prison plus over 100 years for using deadly weapons and multiple other charges. After Bordeaux testified against her, Erica attacked her in prison, sending Bordeaux to the hospital and earning herself an additional 20-year sentence. With no chance of parole, Erica will spend the rest of her life behind bars. Bordeaux was sentenced to 20 years for attempted robbery and conspiracy, while Warren received 40 years for his involvement in Kruger's murder. The trials of Nikko's accomplices concluded, and his case proceeded. On July 10, 2014, the court held a second hearing for Nikko. The judge ruled that he was temporarily unfit for the death penalty due to his severe mental condition. However, on February 17, 2015, during a psychological evaluation, Nikko suddenly declared, "I am mentally competent to receive the death penalty. I don't want to waste my time with these evaluations." Despite his statement, his behavior contradicted his words. In April 2015, he carved the number 666 onto his forehead but did it backward due to using a mirror. In June, he used a razor blade to cut his tongue and carved Satan onto his face, then smeared blood all over his cell. By September, he had mutilated his own genitals and did so again in November, claiming he wanted to shape them like a snake. The severity of his injuries required 65 stitches. These extreme actions further delayed his death penalty hearing. To prevent further self-harm, prison officials banned him from shaving, installed 24/7 surveillance cameras, stuffed cotton in his cell door gaps to prevent the smuggling of razor blades, and checked on him every 15 minutes. Psychologists were divided over his condition. Some believed he suffered from severe mental illness, while others thought he was faking insanity to avoid execution. After 2 years of observation and prolonged legal proceedings, on May 30, 2017, the panel of judges reached a final verdict. They confirmed that Nikko had antisocial personality disorder, but was fully aware of his actions. The premeditated murders of 4 people in 10 days made this one of Nebraska's most heinous crimes. Nikko was sentenced to death, along with 450 years in prison for illegal possession and use of firearms. In 2019, Dawn, a 46-year-old volunteer advocating for prisoners' rights, expressed sympathy for Nikko and wanted to marry him. To show his affection, Nikko tattooed Dawn's name on his face, but Dawn disliked the gesture. Despite still being on death row, Nikko and Dawn planned to get married. On April 20, 2020, the U.S. Supreme Court rejected Nikko's appeal. He remains incarcerated at the Nebraska State Penitentiary, awaiting his final fate.